and welcome to my podcast, A Penny for Your Thoughts with me, Steve Penny. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be talking to some great people. I hope you enjoy listening in. Thank you. Okay, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Alex for joining us today. It's great to see you, and we're looking forward to having the conversation with you. So if you wouldn't mind starting off just a little bit of an intro of who you are and what you do at the moment.
Right. So my mountain is Mount Lofty.
Okay.
Which is outside of Tardenia, Adelaide, which is where I was born.
Mm-hmm.
So my river is the River Torrens through Adelaide. My people are the Irish folk. And I think my family is an amalgamation of Irish and English, which means that Christmas time at my place is always a
bit chaotic.
Bit of a bum fight.
Yes.
goes back a few hundred years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was raised as a kid in Warran, Sydney, and worked a lot of my life there. And I then heard about this job in New Zealand. Spent 10 years in New Zealand doing the earthquake recovery for University of Canterbury, where we met.
Yep.
And I've now relocated back to Meanjin, Brisbane, and my life has changed a lot since leaving New Zealand. So I now run a business where I help women learn how to negotiate pay rises, which makes me both very popular.
Very unpopular.
And very unpopular.
Yep.
I'm also the co-chair of Reconciliation Queensland.
Yep.
I'm wife to Sean, mother and stepmother to 3 boys, and one of them turned 21.
Oh God!
Okay. I know. The youngest one turned 21 last Friday, which is why I'm able to be here with you in Christchurch today. So it's very exciting to be able to come over and have 2 birthdays on either side of the ditch.
Oh, nice! Yeah,
really exciting.
Yeah, my youngest turns 20 in May, so it's kind of
terrifying, isn't it?
It is terrifying. Yeah, no longer having a teenager in the house is quite a frightening prospect, really.
Yeah.
Well, not even in the house. She's left home, so she's studying. So
well, you're doing well. Mine keep threatening to come back.
Yeah, they come back occasionally, but don't stay for very long.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll take that as encouragement.
Yeah, I think my son's living here in Christchurch. My eldest daughter's up in New Plymouth, and Lucy, my youngest, is at Palmy doing the vet course. So she'll be studying for 5 years. I think we've got another 4 years to go now. Yeah. On that course. So yeah. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're living in Brisbane, and what made you go to Brisbane when you left New Zealand?
I mean, we relocated back to Australia after the whole COVID thing because about 18 months into that, my husband and I had a chat. Yeah. My stepsons were on the other side of the ditch, and one of the things that was lovely about living and working in New Zealand was anytime there was a problem, you could jump on a plane. Yeah. And you'd be there. Yeah. And of course that completely stopped. So it started to feel really different to us. Yeah. So we thought, this thing's got a real tail on it. We don't know which way it's going to go. Yeah. We need to be able to get to our family. So given also I have parents who are starting to have, elderly parent issues, they're in Sydney. So we thought it was probably about time that we reconnected. Yeah. So that was the reason, and it was Brisbane because one of the boys was at QUT doing data science. Yeah. And so now we've got 2 boys in university. One of the others is doing psychology, and our middle son is just finishing an apprenticeship as a boat builder.
Oh, nice. Excellent.
So he's up the road a bit in Cairns.
Yeah. Yeah. But all in Australia.
But all on the same landmass, which is helpful. Yeah. But I have to say, don't relocate in a pandemic. That would be one of my lessons. Yeah. Yeah. It's a mammoth effort to get back. Yeah. Very easy to fly out of New Zealand. Not so easy to get around Australia when various different premiers started throwing borders. Yeah. Yeah, I think that pandemic has changed so much in the way that we travel and the way that we work and every other aspect of our lives, really. Yeah. And I think one of the things I've certainly come to the conclusion of is that when I get to the point of retiring, I don't want to be in New Zealand.
because if we have another pandemic, then I'm kind of stuck and won't be able to get anywhere. And I like the idea of being closer to my family back in the UK.
Yeah.
Because, my parents are getting older as well. My dad's 80 next year. My mum's a year behind him. So being this far away with the risk of being stuck in the country is not something I really want to consider. So, I think it's sort of also, I would say it's focused me on what I want to do with my life as well, because having had a bit of time during the pandemic lockdowns to think, do I want to be doing this for the next 10 or 15 years, came to the conclusion I don't. I'm 55 this year.
Yeah.
I've been working for 40 years next year.
Yes.
That feels like long enough.
Yes.
So I'm looking for what's the next stage for me.
And have you decided what your next stage is?
We're getting there. We've kind of come to the conclusion that we want to retire. We want to retire relatively early. So by the time I'm 60, we want to stop work.
Yeah.
So my wife and I, we've been married for donkey's 25 years now.
Oh, congrats.
We want to retire to Italy. That's our goal at the moment. Into Tuscany.
I'll see you there. What a brilliant idea.
Well, I've got the option to go back to the UK, but to be honest, if I had the choice between the UK and Tuscany, I know which one's going to win.
Yeah. Totally. But do you find yourself, I think if you work in property or any sort of related field and you're travelling around Italy, you find yourself driving past things and going, oh, and you're doing it up in your head?
Yeah.
Do you do that?
Yeah.
And you read all of those websites where you can buy a villa for $1 and you know it's going to cost you millions, but you're kind of tempted anyway.
Yeah, but the property prices over there are pretty static as well at the moment.
Yeah.
They haven't really increased in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Whereas property prices over here are so volatile, you don't know where they're going to go.
Yeah, that's right. Well, usually just one way.
Yes. Yeah, which is not bad if you're a property owner. But,
Indeed. But there's a real charm about that part of the world that is difficult to. Well,
it's that, and it's the access to the rest of Europe as well. Because one of the things that Chrissy and I really like is the history. And New Zealand's a great country, but it hasn't really got that same kind of history as you've got in most of Europe because it hasn't been settled for as long. And we really enjoy just going and seeing places that have been lived in for 2,000 years. There's something about that we find really quite moving, and the idea that the buildings are more permanent than the people. Well, you want to come over and have a look over the other side of the ditch, Steve. There's a few places over there that have been occupied for about 63,000 years. Yes, absolutely, yes. But that is true. The Aborigines have been there for a very, very long time. It's hard. It's not very well known, though, I don't think.
Oh no, Australians and their history, we're shocking. We've been in denial of the black history of that country for a very, very, very long time, and I think the nation's kind of waking up to itself a bit. Yeah,
is that what the reconciliation part of your
it is. So there's a reconciliation state body in every state now. The last territory actually was Northern Territory, and they've just gotten a group together a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then we have Reconciliation Australia, and the purpose of that is really to give some structure and form to the reconciliation movement, which has been going on for 60 years in the country.
Yeah.
And that it's that is born out of Indigenous land rights and living conditions, and trying to close the gap on a variety of really difficult topics.
Socioeconomic issues.
It's very challenging. But all of those things themselves come from a history that has been denied. So it's not even taught in school.
Yeah.
When I was at school, you learned that the history of Australia started in 1788 when Arthur Phillip, sort of sailed into Botany Bay and then into Sydney Harbour and started a colony. We've got a huge amount to answer for, haven't we? Totally. And I think the challenge is, okay, now we have materials. Now we have the stories. Yeah. Let's get them into the curricula. Yeah. Let's help the kids kind of see the beauty of the country through different eyes. Because I think certainly as a white fella, which is the Australian version of Pākehā.
Yes.
When you grow up in the country as a white fella, you can sometimes feel disconnected from the land. I know that in South Australia I certainly did. Yeah. I think that I'm a water person. I like being around water. And South Australia doesn't have very much water. Yeah. It has a lot more than it used to have, thanks to a desalination plant out of Adelaide. But actually that part of the country is incredibly dry.
Yeah.
And so I never felt a connection. So one of the amazing things about the reconciliation movement and the opportunity for every individual is to learn about the country and get connected to it in a way that you potentially haven't been before, because it was all about white guys with funny wigs and
and
naval hats on. So
do you think the issues in Australia are similar but probably slightly more severe than the issues in New Zealand in terms of that same sort of thing around the Treaty of Waitangi and the sort of the disconnect between the way the Maori are treated and the way the white Europeans are?
I think that thematically there are some similarities, but the base conditions of the countries are very different.
Yeah.
So you have a smaller land mass, a fewer number of iwi, and you have a more defined territories between different hapu and iwi groups.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there may not be some areas that are disputed, or peoples who have been dispossessed of their lands and moved around. I know that's happened in New Zealand.
Yeah.
In Australia, the frontier wars raged from 1789 to 1934.
Jeez.
And there's a wide range of estimates of how many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders were killed during that period, and very difficult to establish, but somewhere between 600,000 and over 1 million people.
So it's genocide, basically.
It is totally genocide. Yeah. It meets the UN definition of what a genocide is repeatedly. And in Australia, we also had prime ministers who, like Alfred Deakin was a really good example of, who were just very out and out racist in their views. They held the view that Aboriginal peoples would just die out, and you didn't need to worry about them at all, because soon they'd be gone. And then, then
all those issues would go away as well.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to worry about any of that stuff. So, the country then had a white Australia policy, and so there were, it was a huge thing to let, the Italians and Greek folk in the 30s and 40s, and it took a lot longer to let, Southeast Asians in, and so that policy continued in the country for years and years and years. Yeah. So as a kid going through school, you can imagine you get this really warped view of what the history of the place is, and there's a lot of denial and silence around a lot of the, the history. But there are some amazing stories too, some of the battles that were fought and some of the incredible figures of Australian history. Yeah. Quite remarkable people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and such diversity, we're talking about the difference. Australia has well over 400 different nations in it. Yeah. It has over 850 different language groups.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of different groups have been relocated and driven into different missions. So sorting it out through the native title process in Australia is quite complex and difficult. Creates pain and anguish when people who've been relocated from one area go through a native title process and get told that the land's got nothing to do with you because you're from over there.
Yeah, so you have to go back over there.
Even if you've lived here for 60 years,
Yeah, or your entire life and it was your parents that were relocated or whatever it may be. Yeah,
yeah, and the incredible sacrifices, what am I trying to say here? The incredible sacrifices made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander parents in many jurisdictions. Most of the states had a version of the protector of Aborigines type role, usually given incredible powers to take children away from situations and family situations that were thought to be somehow harmful to the child. But all you needed to be harmful was an Aboriginal person. So you have stories of Aboriginal folk whose parents pretended that they were Fijian
so that their kids
weren't taken, and grandmothers of families who, grandmother who knew she was Aboriginal, she was known as an Aboriginal, so she wouldn't, connect with her family. She denied them so that she would protect them because they were pretending to be, mum and dad were pretending to be Fijian, so the kids. So that level of dysfunction,
that's horrible,
and
isn't it?
Pain and anguish is part of the reason why at the moment we're coming into a referenda in the second half of this year in Australia, where the nation will have the opportunity to vote for one of the three things that was asked for in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which is itself both a journey and a document that from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples asking the nation to walk with and to resolve some of this and to reconcile.
Yeah.
And one of those things was constitutional recognition of a voice to Parliament, so the voice being a body that would speak on behalf of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folk to the Federal Parliament of Australia on any legislation that affects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Which is pretty much going to be any legislation, isn't it? I would think. Most things will have an impact to some degree.
Yeah, and I guess that body will have to determine what, where it puts its focus on that. But part of that is because for years and years and years we've had efforts at trying to close the gap in things like education, healthcare, incarceration, housing, and with very little success.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is that white folk keep sitting in rooms with white folk and trying to figure out what to do without asking people.
All you've got to do is look at the US for a great example of that.
It doesn't work.
If you have the same people making the same decisions, then nothing's ever going to change.
Well,
is it?
it doesn't allow sort of creative thinking to come in.
No.
So that was one part of it. The other two parts was a treaty with Aboriginal people, and that's that's where there has been over the last week actually a conference going on in Brisbane between Australia and New Zealand to learn about Indigenous issues in both countries and thematically some of the issues that come out of things like treaty and improving conditions for First Peoples. And the last one is truth-telling, which is a really big area. So there's been a couple of truth-telling commissions now, state-based in Australia, and they involve listening and hearing the stories of people who are alive, to tell that history and to acknowledge and accept that on behalf of a nation so that people can get that.
That's going to be quite confronting, I would have thought.
Some of the Yule Book Commission was the most recent one. That's a commission in Victoria.
Yeah.
And some of the stories, it was streamed live, as a lot of these things are, and incredibly heartbreaking stories about family. And, just repeatedly you find yourself thinking, God, if that's my family, I would be as angry as hell and I would fight like all buggery.
Yeah.
And that's what we need, I think, white fella Australia to acknowledge, that if it was us, if it was white fellas, people would be screaming about it.
There'd be protests every week in front of Parliament and the lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, it's a challenging time.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of I really don't know too much about the Aboriginal history. Do they have much in the way of written history for their, or is it similar to the Maori in that it's a lot of spoken histories?
Yeah, there is a lot of spoken histories, and this is where I'm not an expert in this, so I can point you to some, though. We might need to have get you another guest for this one in particular. It's fascinating, though, but a lot of the histories are kept in the songlines. Yeah. So they are songlines themselves. A fantastic book by Lynn Kelly and Margot Neal about songlines and how they are a mnemonic device for remembering generations and generations and generations of knowledge. So when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folk get to the time where they can learn that, and that's a process that is different in different nations, and
it's kind of a rite of passage type thing, is it? That my understanding, and it may differ across nations, is that it's not necessarily given that you would get all the songlines. So that is something that the communities work out how they're going to pass that on. Right. But it's certainly... It must be a great honour in the community to be responsible for that, though, I would say.
Yeah, and it's challenging because a lot of the elders who are around on country are passing away, and a lot of the younger folks come to the cities. This is a regional, rural, metro, urban kind of challenge anyway. But you've got to be on country to learn those learnings and sort of develop that law.
Yeah.
And of course, if the kids are away a lot in the cities, it becomes very challenging.
You miss
for
out
the
on that
elders.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's amazing that you're actually taking that on, to be honest. It must be quite a challenging thing for you, as you say, as a white fella, to be sitting in the room and listening to these stories and knowing that...
It's a privilege to sit. It's a real privilege. I mean, having had the experience in New Zealand with iwi through the rebuild, which to me was kind of my goldfish out of water moment. You know, I liken white culture to a goldfish that's in water, doesn't know it's in water until it gets taken out.
Yes.
And then it goes, holy moly, look at that. Look at all those things I didn't really see about myself.
Yep.
So going back to Australia, I thought, well, I don't want to just be goldfish back in water again. There's got to be something that I do that's different.
Yeah.
So I keep that learning alive and continue my own journey. But I talk to, my role is to talk to white people essentially about the journey and what it means, because we can't create cultural safety for people unless white fellas are prepared to change too.
Absolutely. Yep.
You know, so it's about how do you step up, what do you do, how do you figure out what you're, you know, to get going on in a way that's meaningful to you, because everyone's journey is different.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't really know how to follow that one. So, I mean, obviously, the career path is something you actually want to make sure that you're making a difference. That seems to be a driver for you, from what I've seen of you over here in New Zealand. And now that there's a real desire to leave a legacy that's a positive one.
Well, I like people, and I like that. I like the idea that we could be better. You know, so I don't think that's groundbreaking, though. Don't we all feel like that?
Yeah, I think. I mean, in different ways. I think everybody, if you've got any kind of moral compass that you do want to make a positive difference to those around you, and I think we all do it in slightly different ways. You know, one of from my point of view, probably the things that I like focusing on is projects like healthcare projects, because they have an immediate impact on the community in a positive way. You know, if you do a good project, people are going to be better because of it, and that's where I get, I guess, most of my sort of day-to-day job satisfaction is from doing projects like that, that and schools, and that's why the tertiary education's been something I've been focused on as well, because I see that it makes a difference. We're giving young people the right environment to learn, which has got to be a good thing. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, to me, the reason that you jump out of bed when you work in tertiary education is all about having, you know, a contribution to make. To a space that is going to change the lives of young people. Yeah. You certainly don't get out of bed to go, yippee, another week of dealing with parking issues and
that and office fit outs are my thing. That fits in that category. You know, it's like there's one, just copy that, and there's another one, just copy that, and that's soul destroying work. It doesn't benefit anybody really.
No.
You know, the people that's working in the office are okay, but that's it. You know, and whereas doing something that, you know, the tertiary education space, that's why I enjoyed when I was invited to mentor the CNRE students at UC. It was, you know, I was nervous about doing it, but I was really pleased I was asked, because it gave me an opportunity to help in some small way those students. Yeah, because, you know,
it feeds your soul. I think.
It does. It gives you a positive spin on your life, you know, and I think we need to all be a bit more engaged in that process. I think the thing that I've seen, certainly with the Maori culture and with my wife's Chinese, and the Chinese family culture, and what you're saying about the Aboriginal culture, is I think Westerners have lost that connection with their family to a large extent. We tend to focus on the family as being the husband and wife and the kids. Yeah. And the family isn't the husband, the wife and the kids, it's everyone else around them as well. And losing that connection changes who you are.
Yeah, totally.
You know, I think it's important. I mean, I've started a bit of a journey myself. I've sent off to get the Ancestry DNA testing kit.
Oh, brave.
Which is going to be interesting.
Yes.
It's made more interesting by a discovery I made a wee while ago. I started doing our family tree. Yes. And I knew that my maternal grandfather was a prisoner of war in the Second World War. He was a bomb aimer on bombing flights. Mm-hmm. He was shot down in 1942 and repatriated in 1945. And I found out that he actually got back into the UK in May of 1945, and my mum was born in July of 1945. He'd been out of the country for 3 years prior to that. So that was a little bit confronting for me.
Yes.
But it's sparked some really interesting conversation with both my parents about what does that actually mean. He was my grandfather. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. He passed away a number of years ago from cancer, but he's still my grandfather.
Totally.
And but all it means is now there's a little bit of my family that I don't know anything about because there's a gap.
So you've got to find out.
So I want to find out.
Yeah, totally.
So that's that journey, that finding out who I am.
Yes.
Is part of why I'm doing this as well, because I think everyone's got that journey that they're going on, and I think talking to people about what they've done and why they do it and all those things it's amazing.
I think it's such an important part, it's actually a really important part of a reconciliation journey.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned both in New Zealand and that holds true for Australia as well is that when you sit and co-create or work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders or Māori here, you come with your the baggage of your heritage.
Yep.
And that when you sit down, that represents something. And if you don't know what that is, it makes you blind to a lot of the nuance of what's happening in that interaction.
Yeah.
So one of the first questions I got asked when I got here was, what's your culture?
Yeah.
And
so that's the mountain, the river, and the people.
Well, and the question was asked to be by Dr. Timari Tau, who I understand was asking the question to figure out if I had even asked myself the question.
Yeah.
Now, happily, I've been interested in my family tree for years, and I know that my folk are from Armagh in Ireland, and I was able to tell him that. He thought that was kind of good that I had actually asked the question, so I had an inkling of it. In my work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, I now understand more about what the impact of that is, because it's difficult to draw any conclusion other than if you're Irish in Australia, somewhere along your ancestral line you have people who were part of trying to wipe out Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders.
Right.
It's a bit devastating. So I know that my folk came to Australia via Western Australia, came across to South Australia, chosen by the finest British minds, judicial minds in Britain, to take a one-way, all expenses paid trip out to the Gully.
For stealing a loaf of bread.
Well, and it's interesting, isn't it? When we think about what we know psychologically about people these days, we know that a very high proportion of abusers abuse.
Yeah.
So if you've been dispossessed of your land and beaten up by the judiciary for just trying to survive, when you get out to the new place,
that's exactly what you're going to do.
You dispossess people of their land and you beat them up for just trying to survive.
Yeah.
So owning that's a really big part of that sort of truth-telling piece. But But
I think
we're not responsible for what those people do, but we're responsible
for how you react to it now.
Yeah, and also for unpicking the systems that were designed all that time ago that exist today and perpetuate that type of hurt.
I think
and pain today.
there's a risk. There is a risk of I don't know quite how to put this, but the idea of everything that was done by the white people being bad, therefore we should delete it all from history, which seems to be the approach that some people are taking, I don't think is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I think, there is a history there. What we need to do is take responsibility for it, not delete it, because it happened. We can't say it didn't happen. And by tearing down all the statues and doing all the other stuff that's been going on, you're not really changing anything. There is an element of me that recognises that those statues shouldn't be glorifying the type of people that they were. And absolutely right.
Yeah.
If that person was there because they're a slaver, then get rid of them because that's wrong. Absolutely right. But there's got to be a balance, I think.
So I think you're right when you say balance. So I looked at this because there has been such a furore, hasn't there?
There has, yeah.
And I really like Tama Iti had a really good take on this. His thoughts were that you take all of those silly statues that you want to remove and you put them together in a museum.
Yeah.
So we can all go and visit them and remember
how bad we were.
Yeah. How some decisions that we make are not right.
Yeah.
I went looking at the sort of that monuments question in the Australian context when I got back to Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I was able to find, thanks to a little group called Monuments of Australia,
Right.
it turns out that there are people who count these things, to which I am eternally grateful at this point.
Yep.
And I can tell you that there are, across the nation of Australia, there are some 38,400 odd monuments.
Yep.
And 48 of them have anything to do with anything Indigenous. So getting back to that question
That's
of
the
balance,
yeah.
part of what I would say is we probably have a few more statues of James Cook than we need.
Yep.
Just go out there on a limb. He's probably one of the more popular ones.
Yep.
So is it really erasing history if we take down a few of them?
No, not at all. But I mean, my view on that is more, it's not so much that getting rid of the statue, but the idea that you're deleting everything about that person because they were wrong is something that some people have suggested. You shouldn't even consider him as being part of it because he was so bad. But if we forget what he was like, we run the risk of repeating the errors.
Well, I don't think you can. I mean, I'm not a supporter of saying, well, we just, try to get rid of someone like James Cook or Lachlan Macquarie or something like that from Australian history. What good would that do? Because then we don't learn the lessons.
Exactly.
And I accept also that while there were some really, really horrible effects or consequences of James Cook standing on Possession Island and claiming a vast tract of land in the name of King George.
Because there was nobody else there as far as he was concerned.
And yet his diary on the very same day noted that there were people, he could see people from the island. Anyway, but they don't count. Aboriginal people didn't count then. Yeah. So I think that while there were some horrible consequences that flowed from that, he was also an incredible navigator. Yeah. And that's part of history that we should remember. Yeah. So I think the
fact that he made it from the UK to Australia is remarkable given the time that he was doing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my recollection from school is it was about the journey that he made to get to Australia, and there was very, very little about what happened once he got there. And that's obviously the whitewashing that goes on. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah, and his quote unquote discovery, which we now understand to be complete and utter bollocks, because first of all, he didn't discover it. Yeah. There'd been people there for a long time. Yeah. 65,000 years. Yeah. So that description, really, really unhelpful. But that also paints out the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Macassans. Yeah. So that moment in time, the French, yes, indeed. And we know also that even Māori had been trading over to New South Wales as well. Yeah.
But they were trading, they weren't coming over and taking over the land, were they?
No, exactly.
It was a fair trade rather than we're going to come here and we're going to take everything and here's a blanket.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the way the English approach things, unfortunately.
Yes, indeed.
Much to my chagrin. Okay, so moving on to a few different things then. I know a little bit about what you're doing currently. So the early years of your career, we sort of kind of glazed over that fairly quickly. Where did you, when you left school, what were you doing?
Okay. So you want to go back to schools? Okay, so I was a teenage runaway.
Okay. Here's a good place to start.
So at the age of 15 and a half, I decided one morning that I packed a bag and I left and I didn't come home for 3 years.
Right.
Yeah. I was a horrible teenager. Sorry, Mum. Sorry, Dad.
I think we all go through that stage at some point in our lives.
Yeah, but some teenagers are more hideous than others. And I would put myself firmly in that camp, Steve. Mm-hmm. So I took off, left school. So I was halfway through year 11, I think, in New South Wales. So, and went and hung out with a boyfriend at the time and then attempted to get work.
Right.
Which is very easy when you're 15 and a half and have no skills.
Yeah.
So I did a range of things from packing sponges into machines that would wrap plastic around them to making computer cables. I don't know if you recall, but there used to be a flat computer cable that had rainbow colours.
Yeah.
I can show you how to make those if you like. And bummed around. I did grape picking, the really the really, professional jobs.
Cutting edge type work.
Cutting edge work.
Yeah.
Ended up in Queensland working in a factory that was building floats for, World Expo 1988.
Oh, right.
Yep. To this day, I'm still reasonably good welder, and I can make you a pair of chicken feet out of an old pair of sneakers and some foam. So, picked up some skills. Could fiberglass as well. Did a lot of that.
Yep.
Did a lot of soldering.
Yep.
Made a robot.
Yeah.
At that stage, it was a koala that was welcoming everyone. Anyway, but that's not the beginning of my career, really. So that was school. So I then met some people who made me think I probably needed to finish my education.
Yeah.
I went back to technical college to finish my high school.
Yeah.
And then because everyone else was going, I went to university.
Mm-hmm.
I originally thought I was going to do psychology. I did 2 years of psychology and got politicised in that time at universities. Dreadful places. They really make you think. And
Yes. Yes,
and then
do.
ended up doing political science and zoology.
That's a bit of a difference.
It was a bit weird. I didn't fit any of the paperwork at the time. Now you can do an art science degree. No one bats an eyelid, but at the time it was a bit weird.
Yeah.
But I'd heard this guy called David Suzuki speak, and he said the politicians of the future are going to need to understand science.
Yeah.
This is back in the 80s. And I thought, he's a clever man. He knows what he's on about.
Yeah.
I shall do what David says.
Yeah.
So at that time, I thought I was going to be a politician.
Okay.
I spent a bit of time working with the Australian Greens in the very early days.
All right.
I was responsible for one of the first drafts of the Australian Greens Constitution, written on the floor of Lee Rhiannon's lounge in Bondi.
Nice.
I then was with Bob Brown in the room while we were trying to convince Cheryl Curnow, who was still with the Australian Democrats at the time, to join up with the Greens. That went down like a lead balloon. That was at Griffith University. There was a conference there where that happened. Sometime after that, I was convinced by a variety of people that those folk were never going to be in Parliament. I should be involved in the Labor Party. So I spent some time working on the campaign staff of Premier Bob Carr.
Okay.
Which was interesting. And then I set up the office once he had won the election.
Yeah.
Set up the office for his Minister for the Environment, Pam Allen.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so after I'd done that, I did that for the better part of a year.
Yeah.
I then was offered a place on a presidential primary in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So I went over and was part of the field operations for Bill Bradley.
Yeah.
Now, he was a retired pro basketballer.
Yeah.
From New York, and he was up against Al Gore.
So he was Democrat then?
Yeah, and he was don't want to take any bad money.
So stood absolutely no chance whatsoever.
No chance. Yeah.
Because he was completely not corrupt. He was never going to get in.
He was great. Yeah, he was really, he was an extremely ethical person.
Yeah.
And he had been politicised through the civil rights movement as a pro basketballer. There were places he would go to play, and his African American colleagues would be segregated and made to be in different places. Anyway, Bill was lovely, and I was placed on that campaign by a fellow called Rick Ritter, who was a pollster, who was doing the polling, and he was from the Midwest, and he's a very tall, skinny, quintessentially American kind of nerdy guy. And I saw some numbers after I'd been on the campaign for some months. Yeah. And I said to him, Rick, do numbers read any differently in the United States? So he went, no. And I said, because I've seen some numbers, Rick. And he goes, yeah. And I said, this campaign's stuffed, isn't it? He goes, oh, yes. I said, so why are we still here? Well, he says, the chairman of the committee, well, that's Bill's friend. So they were there to spend the rest of the money. Right. Because they didn't know how to give it back to anyone in an ethical way. So they ran until there's no money. So once I had established that it wasn't going to go anywhere, I was like, right, I'm going to go to New York and go shopping. Yep. So I did that for a couple of weeks and came back to Australia, and then, surprisingly, decided that everyone in politics was mad and that what I should do is something else. So I went and ran a nightclub for 3 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I know. I should have warned you. I have a CV that's like a dog's dinner. It really is. It just jumps all over the place.
Yep.
I follow opportunity, difficult circumstances, and that require a lot of really complex problem solving.
Yeah.
So this nightclub that I went into, I literally took a phone call from a guy I'd done a lobbying job for years before, and he said to me, "Can you come and run this nightclub?" And I said, "I don't know anything about running a nightclub." He said to me, "Yeah, I know, but you'll learn." And the guy that I've got in there at the moment is defrauding me.
Right.
And I need a fast turnaround. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. That sparked my interest.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a fun job.
Yeah.
Turned the business around in 2.5 years and lived the almost famous life. Had beers with Dave Grohl, which to this day makes me extremely popular with my sons. It's probably the only thing that makes me mildly cool, just for a nanosecond.
Yeah.
But we did lots and lots of gigs and kind of got it going. But you can't, if you have that life, you kind of, because you're working when everyone else is relaxing and partying.
You don't have a life yourself, really.
You don't have a life yourself. You can't have a family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I left and started doing consulting around business strategy and how to turn things around.
Right.
Yeah.
Having learnt that through
the nightclub.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then that sort of business strategy coaching type role then, I guess, is it?
Well, that was the nightclub itself was the Roundhouse at the University of New South Wales. The next job was doing business strategy for the Sport and Recreation Centre, which had a pool and a gym and squash courts and a considerably large estate, including a Grade 1 cricket ground.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't turning over. It wasn't making money. It was losing a huge amount, and the university didn't like it. So there were opportunities also with the nearby Sydney Football Stadium.
Yeah.
So that era was all about exploring what the opportunities were and putting some initiatives forward there.
Yeah.
That got me noticed by people who were working to the university. Yeah. So I worked for an architect who was the master planner for the university, and I did the master plan for the Randwick campus. And then we went off and did a master plan for the Blue Mountain City Council.
Oh, wow.
So I worked in kind of that field for a while, and that's kind of how I came to property.
Yeah.
Because no one comes to property by knocking on the door there's property written on it. We all seem to come through these bizarre ways.
Very different routes, yes. Yeah.
So I came to it via consulting and also working with universities and tertiary education estates. So then I've had a number of other roles in universities, including working in the facilities departments of universities. It was funny. I've managed to find a lot of opportunities through my career. One of them was walking into the office of the then facilities manager at UNSW, who was sitting at his desk. I'd known this guy when I was a student leader. I'd known him from years before.
Yep.
He's sitting at his desk with his head in his hands, looking at this really big report. It was like 2 inches thick on the desk in front of him. And he's holding his head in his hands. And I said, "What you got there, Alan?" And he goes, "Oh, bloody thing." And he picked it up, and it was an internal audit report on facilities management.
Whoa.
And it contained a couple of hundred recommendations that when you added them all up, basically meant your internal systems are pretty crap and you need to start again.
Yeah.
So I said to him, "Would you like me to take care of that for you?" And 3.5 years later, it was done.
Oh, God. That's only a small job then.
Oh, it was kind of a special projects thing, but it was just that moment where he kind of needed someone to reorganise a whole lot of detail. And then, the project itself had 22 work streams, and we did everything from procurement through to maintenance schedules and new contracts and design guidelines, and all sorts of stuff came out of all of that.
Yeah.
Got to consult with different people and learn bits about what they were doing. It was fabulous fun.
Yeah.
But for him, it was a headache. Yeah. And I just happened to be there at the time.
At the right time,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said. I think one of the things that's come out from the people I've talked to so far is that they've all said that they've taken opportunities when they came up. But I think, and that's a big thing, that if you turn the opportunity down, usually you'll look back and wish you hadn't. because you don't know what it's going to turn into until you actually try it. And I've certainly found, I took the opportunity to go and work in the Middle East, which was a big step. But I'm really glad I did it because it gave me the opportunity to say I've done it, and I wouldn't go again. I didn't enjoy the experience overly, but the projects were just amazing. Getting involved on multi-billion-dollar projects it's never going to happen anywhere else really.
Yes.
Because there isn't the capital available to do that type of work, and just having the experience of doing it and being successful at it and knowing that I can do it has just given me a lot of confidence in myself. As much as anything, which is what's driven me to do what I'm doing now.
Well, I had the very great fortune of working with a guy called David Chesterman, who was the master planner for the UNSW from years ago. And he was constantly getting me to do things that were kind of throwing me out of my depth. I had it was almost like I was in a perpetual state of feeling like I was drowning when I was working for him. I'd be like, everything would be okay, and he'd say, right, I need you to write 2 chapters for this report on a topic that I'd never heard of before. And I'd have to go and research and pull it all together. And sometimes he'd look at it and go, yeah, that's great. And other times he'd go, no, that's not quite what I was looking for. Let's start again. It was so
always out of your comfort zone.
Always out of my comfort zone. And so what he taught me by doing that was to get comfortable with being out of my comfort zone. So when you fast forward to something like an earthquake recovery, it's like, I haven't done an earthquake recovery before, but I know that I can figure it out. And when you then end up working with, really talented people, and I was lucky that my role in facilities at UNSW was the moment where I learned, to me, what has probably been the biggest lesson of my professional life, which is always hire people who are smarter than you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can still remember the moment where I was across the table from this woman called Elizabeth, looking at her CV, thinking, Jesus, this woman could do my job. She'd run rings around me. How on earth could I take this on? And having that moment where I was working through the fear of it, the fear and the worry that somehow
she was going to be better than you.
And it's like, well, anyway, somehow I managed to tap into my inner fears and take the plunge with that. And she taught me that you always do that. And from that point forward, that's what I did every time I had to recruit. And so knowing that was a really, really big benefit when we then got to the earthquake, because there were some folks in the early days who were not positioned well to kind of carry the whole thing the whole way. Because it was big and complex, and some folk were chronically fatigued and traumatised and kind of not able to get out of their rut. So the ones that were there at the end are some pretty stunning people, really, So, and it's not to diminish the role of other people. I'm not trying to say that. It's
you need to have the right people in the right roles.
It's the fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
I mean, that's the thing about building. I mean, I've certainly learned about building a team is you don't want a whole load of people who are all the same. You want different people who've got different skills that complement one another. And that diversity of thought and diversity of activity is vital in any organisation, and particularly when you're dealing with something as traumatic as the earthquake event. You want to have a really strong team of people that are able to think on their feet, respond quickly, and respond intelligently to changing situations.
Yes, I think you're right, Steve. I use the visual of a jigsaw puzzle piece rather than a bunch of superheroes. Because the superheroes spend the first 3/4 of the movie trying to beat each other up, and
before they become a team.
Who's got time for that? But jigsaw puzzle pieces are all different, but can complement one another. So to me, it's like that's the way to see teams. It also pays a lot of, I think it's a respectful and dignified way to think about the differences with people as well, and to find a place for every person, so.
So one of the questions I have down here is what's the thing that you've learnt from somebody or heard from somebody that's really changed your outlook? Would that be that, because you mentioned about having intelligent people around you, learning that, would it be something like that, or is that
I think that's a really big, I think that's a really huge professional leap that you take that one. I think about the thing that probably, and I go back to that experience I had of feeling like I was drowning all the time created a set of learning agility skills for me in terms of what I can learn.
Yeah.
So I think that's another piece that's kind of professionally stuff. I find that question really, really hard because
Right.
I think I want to put together a buffet for you
Of different things.
of different things.
Well, I mean, I think that's, it's hard for me to say that there's one thing. I think that I would say that each career step that I've taken, whenever I've changed jobs, it's been because I've learned something and I wanted to try it out.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of step change every now and again in your career where you pick up some knowledge that you didn't have before and you think, right, I want to test that further.
Yes.
How can I take that to the next level? And that's so I haven't really got one thing. It's just been a series of different decisions that I've made.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the other things that I could maybe chuck in there would include things like, and this is particularly a female thing, don't think that because you work hard anyone's going to notice.
Yeah.
Right? You have to learn to be visible.
Yeah.
And that's a particular challenge for women.
Yeah.
So visibility and also being open. That can sometimes be hard when you've got lots of stuff going on in your life.
Yeah.
And work says, we're going on this journey, there's going to be another big change.
Yeah.
And you kind of, on the outside, you're going, yes, hurrah. And on the inside, you're going, really? This week, really? Finding peace around that, I think, because change itself is just so, it's just so
the one thing that's never going to change is that everything's going to change.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
And finding ways of getting comfortable with that.
Yeah. I think that is something that we as a human race are really bad at. We don't like things changing.
No.
Especially if it's not in our control. Those changes are being made by others that we have no control over.
Yeah.
Or by circumstances we have no control over.
Completely. I felt that. So I, back even before I got to uni, I was reading about this thing in the paper. This is back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. Okay, so cast your mind way back. I was reading the paper.
I think I'm older than you.
You'd be surprised. There was this thing called the greenhouse effect.
Yep.
Yeah, and there used to be a department of the federal government called the Commission for the Future in Australia, and it was run by a guy called Philip Adams, and he put together a greenhouse effect conference in 1989.
Wow, okay.
And it pulled together scientists from lots of different fields, ecologists,
climatologist.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That really wasn't going to come out of my mouth. That word. And also, people from building works, public works, and health, and they were talking about things like heat load and sea level rise, and how the modelling was predicting how the globe would work, and then what would that mean for things like food crops and species. And it was possibly one of the more depressing conferences I've ever been to, but it was really important for me because that started me on a kind of a journey with respect to sustainability that has been thematically through most of what I've done. Not as much as I would have liked in some roles, but,
But I think the worrying thing for me is that we did know 30 years ago that there was a problem, and 30 years later we have still not done very much.
No, it's really, it's very frustrating.
It is frustrating.
There have been some really massive, as an example, there have been some really massive floods in Sydney and New South Wales.
My brother's in Gympie.
Yeah,
so he's been sending me pictures.
Yes, it's not pretty.
No, not at all.
But at this conference in 1989, there's a guy from Public Works who has, before the age of digital twins and BIM, he has figured out. He's gone and got all the blueprints of drainage pipes all the way through the city. And he's figured out, with respect to different climatic models that were provided to him by climatologists from Macquarie University, where it was going to flood. So, you watch what happened in Western Sydney last year, and this guy was completely on the money. Completely. So very, very predictable, but the size of the issue and how overwhelmingly
Well,
awful it is.
You look at the contrast you've had on that east coast of Australia with the fires and then the floods. It's obvious that there's something very wrong. You've had year after year of 500-year rainfalls, which it's 500-year rainfalls, and you've had 3 of them in the last 5 years. That's surely got to start changing your criteria.
Yes, exactly. No, it's. I think there's something about the size, the overwhelming consequence of the problem, and the size of the problem that means that psychologically a lot of folk
just shut down.
Yeah. And and so we end up in that space where we're looking at the how do we eat the elephant, and of course we know the answer is in bite-sized chunks, but now we appear to be arguing over which chunk first, rather than we just need to
doesn't
start.
Matter. It really doesn't matter which one you start with.
Start with all. You can go wherever you like. Just get going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one thing that I learnt fairly early on in my career. I was lucky enough to work for a company called Atelier 10 in the UK, who were way ahead of their time when it came to sustainability design. And the director there, Patrick Bellew, he was focusing on how you design a building as a complete system, not how do you design the services that go in it and how do you design the building separately, but the whole thing as effectively as a living organism, and trying to get everything to work together makes a much more comfortable building, but also a much more sustainable and energy efficient building. And if you look at it as a holistic thing, rather than the architect does the fabric, the structural engineer does the frame, the services engineer does the other bits, you end up with a very disjointed building with that approach, and it doesn't necessarily work well together. Whereas if you try and take the view that it's all one system and every bit affects every other bit, you wouldn't treat the human body as different parts. If you've got an issue somewhere, you make sure you cover it everywhere. And it's the same kind of approach. And I think if you take that approach to all the buildings, and buildings use an enormous amount of energy. So we should all be focusing on, New Zealand drives me mad with the inability to design efficient buildings and to put standards in place that mean that they have to be efficient. They're so reluctant to do it, and it is easily done. Everywhere else that I've worked, they know how to do it.
Yeah.
And we
certainly during the rebuild, it's the cost of learning.
Yeah.
That and the cost of that change. And I think that for the private sector, a lot of the time they get hung up on who's going to pay for that. And the answer is, well, if you want to stay relevant in the market, you pay for it.
Yeah.
But it's not something that business owners like to hear.
No, what they did in the UK to drive the change is that the government legislated that any buildings that they occupied had to be to the highest possible standard. And that drove the developers to build those buildings like that. And as soon as the government was doing that, then everybody else that wanted to be in a building said, I want the same standard.
Yeah, so that happened in Australia a while back, and it started to really push things along.
Yeah.
It probably followed that example. And I think it's only in more recent times in New Zealand that the government, I think it was only with Jacinda Ardern's government that
they started to make some changes. But there's been a lot of pushback. There's still a lot of pushback in the industry.
People don't like spending money, do they?
Even for a good reason. No.
Even to stay safe.
even so that they don't.
Even to save your grandchildren.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's probably the other thing. Just circling back onto the sort of the First Nations conversation. The other thing that I think that we miss, and probably one of the reasons why we're so bad at looking after the environment, is we don't have that connection to the land that you see in the Maori culture for definite over here, and you see in the Aborigine culture. We don't treat it with the respect it deserves because we see it as a resource that we can just use and do what we like with. And because of that, we treat it really badly, really inefficiently, and it's doing a lot of harm. And
abuse is abuse.
Absolutely. But the other side of it, I think, that we're really missing as well is that we keep talking about we're killing the planet. We're not. We're killing ourselves. The planet will still be here. And it will recover.
Yes. Probably better without us.
A lot better without us, exactly. We're actually killing ourselves.
Yes.
And it's easy to stop. It's just the political will to make that change, I think.
I think you're right, Steve, and I think that what we have had to do through the COVID years has proven to everybody that nations are entirely capable of big, bold moves if they have to.
Yep.
The difficulty that we have, of course, with climate change is that you don't have such a big downside so fast. If people were going to start dropping dead like they did with COVID, that's going to, at that moment, things will change. But I think
the trouble
that
is
this
that
is
when
a
that
slow boil, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the frog in the saucepan.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Until you're dead, you don't realise how bad it is.
Exactly. Well, you look at, really feeling for the folk in the North Island after the cyclone.
Yeah.
And, hearts go out to the families who have lost folk. It's awful.
Yeah.
But you've got to say that they are climate change deaths.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, as are, Vanuatu has also been very badly hit.
Yep.
You think about some of the bushfire season of 2019, 2020 in Australia.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
and you look at the level of cyclones and hurricanes that they're getting on the continental US as well. All of that is ramping up. It's there's the climate change deniers are saying, oh yeah, but it's cyclical. It happens every few thousand years. You get these things going on. But there's so much evidence to show that we've had a negative impact on the environment. The level of carbon in the atmosphere, you can actually track it. You can see it. There's no doubt that it's a real thing. Yeah. And they're still saying no.
I think that then goes to the media. It's a bit like, we were talking before that you get a big story that kind of grabs everyone's attention, but it's actually a very small proportion of people now who genuinely think that there's not a problem.
Yeah. The trouble is they're very loud.
They just get amplified because if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. That then becomes the intersection of the problem with, media.
Yeah.
And we probably need
social,
to be doing some stuff about that as well.
Social media in particular, I think, gives too many people who have no real voice a very loud voice. And they don't really have to think about what they're saying either, because there seems to be very little consequence a lot of the time.
Yeah, very little consequence.
Which is a real issue, I think. We have to... you look at the abuse that Jacinda was getting. I don't agree entirely with the way she was running the country, but nobody deserved to be threatened.
Yeah,
she was trying to do a good job.
Yeah,
and threatening her, threatening her kid, is just utterly wrong.
Yes, absolutely.
It just shows the worst part of our nature, unfortunately, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, a couple of other things I wanted to get onto is one we sort of touched on briefly was the biggest influence as a person in your life, would you say? I know you said that was a political thing.
When we were talking about this before, I thought that's a very political question in my family.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and again, I kind of want to give you a smorgasbord, of an answer there.
Yeah.
I think that there's probably a number of people that I could, point to along the way that have been. So I don't want there to be one.
Okay.
Steve.
No, that's fine. Okay.
I'll come back with a list of 20.
Fair enough.
How's that? Because I think life goes through different areas, doesn't it?
Yeah,
so clearly, when I was trying to sort myself out in my early 20s, the talks by people like David Suzuki actually really resonated with me. That was really important for me to hear that stuff.
Yeah.
And had a big influence, on me at the time.
Yeah.
There have been other times in my life where the teachings of someone like the Dalai Lama have been really, really, influential on how I think about how we should live. Yeah. So there's a whole range of characters, really.
I mean, the Dalai Lama, the sort of the teachings that I know about from him, it's more about doing no harm, isn't it? Your impact shouldn't be a negative one on anybody around you, and you try and make sure that every decision you make doesn't actually harm somebody in some way.
Yeah.
And being selfless to a large extent. I think trying to be as altruistic as you can be, and I think that's difficult for us as a human race to be completely altruistic. There's always some kind of motivation.
Look, he is an incredible example of perseverance in the face of incredible adversity.
Yeah.
And you think about the Chinese invasion of Tibet.
Yeah. The fact he's still alive really is remarkable.
Yeah, well, he tells us he's not going to die for another 9 years or so.
Right.
Yeah.
I would believe him.
Yeah, I believe he knows a lot.
He does.
He knows a lot of stuff. But the teachings that he has around things like developing, patience and tolerance and understanding and listening and, all of that, so I listen to that stuff. I try to absorb it and understand it in the way that he intends it. And then the other part of my brain says, but yes, he's never worked in a university, has he? Maybe
he's never had a real job.
Maybe if he'd worked in a university with some academics, he'd feel differently.
Well, I mean, that sort of joking aside, that the circumstances you're in does change your view on things. You can take those teachings on, but you need to be a little bit realistic with them as well. That you're in the real world with other people who don't necessarily feel the same.
Yeah.
So you have to adjust how you act to deal with the circumstances you're in.
Yeah. Although what I like about his teachings is that they are very human.
Yeah.
They are all at a very, very human level, and so you can see those learnings thematically in a lot of different places. Yeah. So he makes connections regardless of theology or, sort of political persuasion.
Yeah.
Because he connects at a very human level. And that is a skill that I think that in the modern age we need a lot more of, because there's so much that amplifies division.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, we all bleed the same way.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we keep talking about different races of humans. There's only one.
Yes.
And that's right. We need to keep remembering that.
Yes, absolutely.
We're not different races, we're one race.
Yes, that's right.
There's no real genetic difference between any of us.
Exactly.
To say that we're different races is completely untrue. And that personal connection stuff, that's why I like the part of my job where I go out and meet people. That's that for me. I hate sending emails because there's no connection. It's instant gratification in some ways because that's gone, I don't have to deal with it anymore. But you miss that sort of interaction you get from having a conversation with somebody. That's why I'm doing this as well. I like this. They're interesting.
Yeah, well, I like people too. That's thematically for me. It's been about where I really get a lot of personal satisfaction is where I can help somebody to be more than they thought they could be.
Yeah.
That's for me, that is a real sweet spot, which is why I do the work that I do now, teaching women how to negotiate.
Yeah.
Because I get feedback where people say, oh my God, I didn't think I'd be able to do that, and I could.
Yeah.
And that moment for me is like, that's the gold.
Yeah.
That makes me go, yes, on the inside. Yes. Doing good things, making stronger communities.
Yeah, building
tick,
people.
tick.
Absolutely. So look, I know you're running this business, and obviously you don't get a lot of free time. But if you do take a break and aren't thinking about work, what would it be? What would be the first thing you'd do? Try and recharge your batteries.
Well, so travel is a big one, I think. Seeing new things. My mother has told me for years that I'm an active relaxer.
Right.
Yeah. So if I'm just at home, I've got to potter and tinker about.
Yeah.
Which is why, my husband will tell you that his thing is cooking in the kitchen, mine is FM. I've got to do that. I'm in charge of facilities.
Yeah.
So I'm a tinkerer.
Yeah.
And like to create things with my hands. Bizarrely, during lockdown, I was locked down in New Zealand, and there was the teddy bear hunt for kids.
Oh, yeah.
Remember everyone's putting teddy bears in the window?
Yeah.
And I have no idea where this came from, Steve.
Okay.
Right. We didn't have a teddy bear in the house to put in the window.
Okay.
Right. And I'm thinking, what can I do with the kids going past? I know. I'll put fairy doors on the bottom of all the trees in the front garden.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like,
what?
So for all the listeners, Steve is now looking at me like I'm mad, right? And it's true. I crafted these little doors that had open latches and the little frames around them and stuff. Put them across all the. I have no idea. I think maybe Celtic roots.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to blame that.
Yeah.
I'm going to blame that. Anyway, so making stuff with my hands is something that I like to do to relax.
Yeah.
Travel is another thing that I like to do. If I had an unlimited budget and do anything tomorrow, probably safari in Africa. Mm-hmm. Something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That was going to be one of my next questions, actually.
Where's
the one place on earth you haven't been to that you really want to go to? Is it going to be a smorgasbord? Lots of places.
It is, isn't it? I mean, I really want to get to see Dharamsala. I'd love to see parts of Tibet, although I know that would make me cry as well. I could live in Italy for, obviously we're going to be, fixing up villas next to each other at some point. But Africa, to me, there's so much to see there. I'd love to get to see Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
You know, I'd love to learn how to tango in Buenos Aires. So, you know, it's like I've got kind of a task for each of those places. Yeah, being an active relaxer.
Well, I mean, that's saying to you that when we do retire, Italy's hopefully going to be where we end up, and we're not going to be sitting in the villa in Italy or the apartment or wherever it may be in Italy. We're going to be travelling and seeing as many places as we can. You know, and I think that it's just, you know, you're on a huge planet with lots of places, and if you just stick in the one country, you're missing out so much.
Yeah.
You know, and it's an education, going to different places, meeting the people that live there. And I think one of the things that I really like about the idea of being retired and travelling is you don't have to be back in 2 weeks.
Yes.
You know, that you take your 2 weeks holiday.
Wonderful.
And you can just, if you think, I like this place, I'm going to stay a bit longer.
Yes.
You can just stay a bit longer.
Exactly. No, I love that. But I'm also doing, at the moment, I'm doing a travelling to places in Australia. So my next travel trip will be up to Laura in far north Queensland. So it's like go to Cooktown and chuck a left.
Right.
And the Laura Quincan Dance Festival is on in July. Yeah. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folk come from all over the top end.
Yeah.
And there's 3 days of dance and storytelling. So
that's what you're there for?
I will be up there for that.
Wow.
For sure, yeah. Doing a drive by Cooktown for NAIDOC week earlier in the week. Yeah. A couple of things to do there, then out for the dance festival. So that's like out, you know, off-grid motorhome camping type setup, because it's just out on country. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be awesome.
That will be amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Real adventure.
And one other thing I think can be an interesting question sometimes. If you were able to go back and give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
I've got to say, in all honesty, my 20-year-old self probably needed a right bloody talking to.
I think that's true of most 20-year-olds, to be honest.
Yes,
I've got 3 of them now, so I can tell you that's absolutely true.
Yeah. I think it's probably not just a few pieces of advice. I think it might be a whole lecture.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that as a girl child, one of the things you are socialised to do is to work hard and expect that people will notice and wait for things to come to you. It took me a good 15 years to learn that it wasn't going to come to me. You've got to go and get it. Yeah. And there is a social downside for girls and women around that, because it feels like we're being pushy. Yeah. And out there in the world, there's a lot of stuff that says pushy, aggressive women, aren't they awful? Yeah. You know, don't worry about
she's
them.
a real ball buster, that type of negative sort of thing. Whereas a bloke's just being a bloke and it's fine. Yeah.
But, you know, so I kind of go, I'm a bit in the Helen Mirren camp. She famously said, what, you know, the same question, what would you have said? And she said, I would have said fuck off more often.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like I'm kind of in that space, maybe.
Yeah, I think, you know, as a
this
father,
G-rated, this podcast? I should have asked.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I think, you know, as a father of 2 daughters, you know, I'm very aware of the issue that women are, you know, really not treated as fairly as they should be in the working world. And, you know, my 2 daughters, though, to be fair, do not take any shit from anybody. They are really strong young women, and I'm actually really proud of that fact that they are, because, you know, they stand up for themselves in every situation that they come across, and it's just great to see. Yeah. And you know, that as a parent, that's all you can really hope for, I think, is that they'll stand on their own 2 feet, and, you know, they're not submissive. Yes. And they're not willing to accept that they should be paid less or should be treated worse because they're women at all. Yes. So I think, you know, that... You know,
it is really interesting. But this whole area was very fascinating to me anyway, so I could, you know, we can talk about it for several more hours now. I had one colleague in one of my workplaces, an older male, who found my level of energy and the way I went about doing things very frustrating. Yeah. Because it wasn't the way that he would do it. Right. And because it wasn't the way that he would do it, he judged it to be an inferior level of response. Yeah. And that made it a challenging and complex working relationship between he and I. Yeah. I didn't change anything that I did, but I found better ways of challenging him rather than going directly at the problem, because that always elicited a very senior male, no, you don't understand, limiting response. Eventually I got to a point with him where I said, you must be really happy to work with women like me. Being the father of daughters, you must really love working with women like me. And he looked at me with a really confused look on his face and he said, why is that? And I said, because I'm softening up the environment for your daughters.
Yeah.
And at that, he he knew that was a comment that maybe he could change what he did to be more accepting of the other. And this is something that I think is very big for workplaces and some, all over the world.
Yeah.
It works for women. It works, it works for people of different cultures.
Yeah.
It works for people from the rainbow community.
Yeah. And I do think, if you said to one of these males that treats women badly, would you treat your daughter the way you're treating your employees? You know, the answer most of the time would be no, I wouldn't. So why do they treat their employees like that? That's something that I think it is a cultural thing. I
think sometimes though that men folk are so used to doing things the way they're doing it that sometimes it's the goldfish out of water thing. Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to see that what you're doing has a downside. Yeah. And then there is that funny situation that we have where the first person who speaks up and says, hey, did you notice that when you do this, that happens? Yeah. That person gets branded.
Yeah. As a troublemaker,
and
usually.
That's right. And eventually that person becomes uncomfortable, and over periods of time, if it can't be settled or resolved, there's either resentment that goes up. Eventually that person leaves. So this is a very common problem, particularly if we start talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. Yeah. It's and I understand that there's a similar thing in America with the angry black woman type of thing. But that it's a bit of a signal, I think, for everyone in workplaces everywhere to kind of take a moment and go, in order to get this benefit of diversity of thought, diversity of experience, a more creative base from which to take the business forward or the project forward or the initiative forward. Yep. What do I need to do to kind of make this space easier for that person? Yep. How can I negotiate and compromise what I do to be that jigsaw puzzle piece that fits together?
It reminds me, I'm a massive football, UK soccer fan. Right. In particular, I follow Arsenal Football Club. Mm-hmm. And one of the stars of Arsenal Football Club from a few years ago, a guy called Thierry Henry, who you may or may not know, he was asked about how his playing career, and he said that the manager, a guy called Arsene Wenger that he was under, said to him one day, look, you're coming off the pitch and you're angry about the way things have gone. Why is that? He said, well, that person's not passing me the ball the way I want it. And Wenger said to him, what you've got to understand is everyone on that pitch is different and everyone will pass you the ball in a different way and you're not asking the right question. It's not all about you, it's about the team. Mm. And if you ask the right question, you'll get the right response. Mm. And Thierry Henry said, and he is an elite, absolutely at the top, best footballer in the world player. He said, I had to accept that the other players on the pitch may not be at my level, but also that I knew how they were going to do things. And if I positioned myself slightly differently, I was in a better place to receive the ball. Yeah. And I think that's the same kind of thing. Same principle that everyone's got a voice, but how do you use that voice? How do you get them to share what they think? Yeah. Leader and part of being in a team is knowing where the weaknesses are and not necessarily stressing the weakness, but being aware of it so you can support it.
So I guess that the unlocking moment there is for leaders to know that they've got to constantly be looking for new ways of engaging and new methods to bring into the way that they do the work that they do, so that new, fresh voices can be heard.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. No, it's a good one.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. We've been, an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm...
It's pretty good, isn't it?
It's pretty good. That'll do.
You're happy?
Yeah, I'm very happy. Yeah, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for taking the time.
You're
really
very welcome.
Appreciate it.
It's nice to have a chat.
Thank you for listening to my podcast, A Penny for Your Thoughts, with me, Steve Penny. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation, and I look forward to sharing my next conversation with you. If you want to find out some more, please do get in touch, and maybe we can have you on in a future show. Thank you.